we're taking a look at a Poly video solution that is certified for Zoom, Microsoft Teams, and compatible with several other cloud video solutions. The Poly Studio X30 collaboration bar and the Poly TC8 touch controller for that center of room control experience. There are two ways to control the X30. As the X30 is a collaboration bar with your video, audio, and compute all built into this device up top. You then have a display via HDMI, and that is where you see your Microsoft Teams app and the experience. In order to control that experience and navigate through Microsoft Teams, the two options are to either use the TC8 controller, which gives you all of these control options to control the Microsoft Teams experience, or if you have a touch display, you can pair the X30 with the touch display instead and have a solution that exists only right here, minus the center of room controller experience. In today's video, we'll be diving into the pair as ordered as a single solution from Poly. We'll be looking at all the hardware components that ship with them and getting an overview of them and their specs. We'll then take a look at setting the solution up and working with Microsoft Teams using the control both from the TC8 and from the touchscreen angle. We'll then jump into the Microsoft Teams experience, running a couple meetings, getting a feel for what it's like to record a Microsoft Teams meeting when the X30 is your video input as well as your audio input. And lastly, we'll take a look at how to manage this collaboration bar as well as others with the Microsoft Teams Admin Center. Let's dig in. We are now looking at the Poly Studio X30 camera for your small and huddle rooms, your small conference rooms or huddle rooms. Again, this is a camera that sits up on top of a monitor or can be sat on a surface if so desired. We have the bracket back here that will show you how to mount to the bottom of the device. And it's like any of your other camera options that clip to the top of a monitor, right? You've got this grip over the top that will sit on the monitor, and then this grippy material here that goes in the back of the monitor to prevent it from sliding around. And you just find the optimal angle so that it sits perched right on that monitor and doesn't move or slide around, giving you the right angle that you need. It can also be sat on a flat surface. This again is gripping material here that allows you to just set the device down on a flat surface, keeping the camera stabilized and in place. If we look at the device itself, or the top of the device itself here, the top of the bracket, you'll notice we have two grooved slots, as well as a slot in the middle with a bolt that will hold the Poly Studio X30 in place. And there are two metal lines on the bottom of the Poly Studio X30 that fit into these grooves to keep it nice and centered. Before we get to the Poly Studio X30 itself, let's go over some of the cables that come with it. You've got an HDMI cable allowing you to connect a device in the room, a laptop or a PC, a display in to the device via HDMI. We'll set that off to the side. Next up is the Ethernet cable, giving us internet access to the device. And lastly, our power cables. And now we get to take a closer look at the Poly Studio X30. Looking at the front of the device, one of the first things you'll notice is the camera seems fairly hidden. It's pretty obvious why, and that's because it comes with this privacy camera shade cover. Has a slight magnetic feel to it, so you just set it right over the top and it sticks on. A little gentle pull and the magnet pulls right apart. Let's go ahead and set that up to the side and get a closer look here. As we look at the form factor, you'll see that we've got all of our ports present on the bottom of the device. And as you imagine the mount itself, again, this is the mount, we will have these metal grooves at the bottom of the camera slide right into those two metal inserts right there, and then that bolt will screw right into the bottom of the Poly Studio X30 itself, and that will expose all the wiring that we need to as it sits perched atop the back of a monitor. Looking at the other ports, we'll start on the left. We've got our power at the very far left. We've got a Kensington lock right next to that. We've got an HDMI for video in and an HDMI for video out. We've got a USB-C port right in the middle. Again, the mounting hole right there for our bracket. We've got a USB port sitting right there. And finally, we've got the actual RJ45 connection for our internet. For the audio input, we have 4 MEMS microphones built in and a single speaker for our audio output. Coming in for a closer look at the camera, this is a 4K Ultra HD camera. It has a 4x digital zoom capability with 120-degree field of view, Ultra HD streaming at 4K, 30 frames per second, and 1080p, 60 frames per second. It has automatic people framing and automatic speaker tracking built in. As for content sharing, there are a number of content sharing capabilities: HDMI, whiteboarding, Miracast, and a couple of others we'll put on the screen here. You can share content at up to 4K 15 frames per second, but you can get 60 frames per second as well at lower resolutions. Okay, let's get the Poly Studio X30 all plugged in, get power plugged in, get the HDMI plugged in back there to the screen, and get the internet connection plugged in as well. And once we're done here, we'll move on to the TC8. I want to call out at this point that we can use the Poly Studio X30 with the TC8 controller or with a touchscreen display as well, which we'll demonstrate a little bit later on. There we go. We have plugged in the Poly Studio X30. We already have the display on. Clearly, it is waking up with our fancy light display up top and the spinning Poly logo. And there we go. The Poly Studio X30 is plugged in to a monitor via HDMI, and we are ready to sign in to Teams. The Poly TC8 is our center of room display for those huddle rooms or conference rooms where we are deploying the TC8 alongside the Poly Studio X30, X50, or G7500. It is an 8-inch screen, has a capacitive touch sensor allowing for multi-touch functionality, and it has built-in optimal angle for viewing and interacting with the display right there itself. Flipping it around, got the Poly logo on the back. And this is a pretty thin. If you look at the display itself, it is not a very thick display, so we don't have too bulky of a device. Looks pretty clean, aerodynamic there. There's your RJ45 connector for plugging in your PoE cable. This does not have a power cable spot, as you see on the back. We power this with PoE, reducing the amount of cables that are needed on that table in the center of room. There's also a micro B USB 2.0 port on the back as well, and then all of your typical product information, SKU number, all that stuff right here in the bottom. This is also a grippy surface, so this kind of doubles as your product information, but also that grippy surface that prevents the device from sliding around on the desktop. Bringing that back around, the TC8 controller. Of course, it ships with the RJ45 cable as well, that you will need for plugging into your PoE switch. As I mentioned earlier, the Poly TC8 touch display only requires a single cable, our RJ45, that is connected to a PoE switch. Let's go ahead and plug it in and get this thing fired up. We've just plugged in the TC8 and we see it's already powering on with the PoE Ethernet cable, plugged into the PoE switch, I should say. Getting a closer view, it powers up. Now, if you purchase the TC8 as part of a Poly video package with an X30 and X50, it will be automatically paired to the device when it ships. Therefore, when you plug it in, if you've got the X30 or the X50 plugged in and ready to go, the TC8 will wake up and attempt to pair right away to the collaboration bar. There you go. It's successfully paired with the Poly X30. Looking back at the full setup, we've got our Poly Studio X30 sitting up top, our display right below it that it is perched atop, and the Poly TC8 controller paired automatically as it shipped with the Poly Studio X30. Time to get signed in to Microsoft Teams. After firing up the Poly TC8 touch controller down here and having it automatically pair to the Poly Studio X30 as they ship that way, we can now use the controls on screen of the TC8 to control what's going on our display. If you have a touch display, the Poly Studio X30 is also compatible with a touch display, meaning you can navigate the Microsoft Teams console directly on screen. If you have a screen that does not allow for touch display, the touch controller allows you to navigate. Now, for just navigating around Teams once you're signed in, that's fine. But as you'll see in just a moment, it can get a little bit more tricky and we need to sign in using just the touch controllers. Let's take a look at what this looks like. We use the arrows and this button in the middle to make our selections. So now we've been prompted to sign in since we clicked the sign in button at the bottom. I'll go ahead and click on that and it brings up the on-screen keyboard. Now, please make note that at this time, if you didn't feel like pecking this all in, you could say sign in from another device and sign in via a web browser, or you can plug in a USB keyboard up top and type this in via keyboard. I'm going to go ahead and go down a couple options. We're going to say OK here. We're going to navigate down and say sign in from another device. Now we can go out and do our Microsoft Teams device login through the web browser. As you can see, I signed in on another machine using the web browser, which was a faster way to do this. I need to put in my MFA code and then we will be set. And there we are, signing into Microsoft Teams. Now that we're signed in, again, we can use this touch controller to navigate on screen. As you'll see, if we use the directional arrows, we'll see our options move around on screen. Right now, we have the More at the bottom of the screen highlighted. If we go over, we can pull up our dial pad. We can say New Meeting. If we click on New Meeting, we have to add somebody in order to start the meeting. Going back out, we can go over to our dial pad, and call somebody if we need to, and then navigating over to More, we can do New Meeting, Dial Pad, or Settings, and finally our audio settings right there. So let's just say we go to our settings, we can go to Help and Feedback, About, where we get all of our device information, and then Sign Out and Device Settings. Language, date and time, debug, Bluetooth, accessibility, about, and admin settings. Now, these are all settings that I've gone over in a previous video for another collaboration bar, but we'll take a quick look here as well. We've got all the different languages you could possibly want to choose from. Since we are already on American English, and that describes me, we will stay on American English. Date and time. We do show that we have almost the correct time. We're not in Central, we're on Eastern. So we'll go ahead and go in here and change that up really quickly. There we go, Eastern time is set. Date and time format, I'm fine with all that. Time server, we'll leave that alone for now. Coming back out, we've got our debug. You can either choose log level for your debug settings or restart the device. navigate back out. Bluetooth. If we want to connect anything via Bluetooth, we've got that capability here as well, and it is switched on by default. Accessibility. We've got high contrast mode, large text, and color correction. Again, the About has all the information we need about the exact make and model and firmware, admin agent, Teams version, since this is deployed in Teams mode. Again, this can be deployed in Teams mode. You can use this with Zoom, and there's a couple other providers out there that the TC8 and the Poly Studio X30 play quite nicely in. But we are displaying it currently and doing a demo in Teams mode. Admin settings requires a username and password. Once we've entered the admin settings, going up a little bit more, we've got our change password options up top, our debug level options again, and our network settings. Now we have obtained an IP address via DHCP using Ethernet. That is the options we have here. As you'll notice, this isn't a Wi-Fi enabled device, so Ethernet is the way you need to connect to the internet here. We do have IPv4 and IPv6 capabilities, and you can set DNS servers and security settings in here as well. Taking another quick look at the TC8 controller down here in Microsoft Teams mode, you'll notice we have a little Microsoft Teams join button. So if we had a Microsoft Teams meeting that was being displayed and we were ready to join, we would be able to join with that join button. We can access our dial pad and type in somebody's number and call them right from here. We have an end call if we were in a call. Tracking, camera tracking, we want to turn that on or off. We would prefer to use on. That's some pretty cool technology there. We can mute ourselves on or off and turn our volume on or off as well. One other area that I wanted to demonstrate on the TC8 is that if you swipe from the right, you get this settings menu that pops up. Click settings. You've got a handful of things you can get in here. Very importantly, you get the IP address of your connected room system, which is our Studio X30 here, and you get that for your controller itself. So now we can go and access these systems via our network, now that we have that information. You've got a handful of other information about software versions, serial numbers, all that good stuff as well. If we pop over to user settings, we've got a setting, our brightness level. And finally, to unpair, we get a set of instructions about how to unpair the device. You don't do it from right here. We're going to do it from the actual Poly Studio X30 web interface, and we'll get to that in just a moment. Okay, as you can see, we've now got a meeting set up for the Poly Studio X30. The TC controller has our little join button at the bottom. So instead of using the controller to navigate to our join button and clicking it, we're gonna walk up to the screen and simply click the join button. Are you ready for this? One touch. So once I joined the meeting from my other laptop, we now see that we are in the bottom right hand of the screen, right down there. The Poly Studio X30 has scoped us out. And if we take a step back here and simply hang up from the other laptop, only the Poly Studio X30 will be left in the call, and that brings up our video here. Woohoo! And we're gonna do a little experiment here. We have the tracking turned on. If you remember, we turned tracking on right over there on the screen. So I'm going to step over a little bit and see if the camera follows us over. And there we go. It followed me over. Took a few seconds, but the camera found me and framed me properly. I'm gonna step over to this side a little bit and it will adjust, and in a moment, scope back over and make sure it's framed in on me, the active speaker. There we go. Again, the point of the TC8 controller is to have that single touch, easy control panel in the middle of the table. When we're done with our call, there is an end button and we simply click end and the call hangs up. We have now plugged in the Poly Studio X30 to a touch display rather than a regular display with a TC8. The TC8 touch controller is great when you don't have immediate access to a touch display at your fingertips. Maybe you're in a slightly bigger room, but when you're in a small huddle space and you can easily reach out and touch the display itself, navigating the Microsoft Teams client on screen with the Poly Studio X30 mounted to the top may be the right way to go. Again, this is not just a camera and speakers up here. This is the compute. The Microsoft Teams client lives there. The TC8 was simply a controller to control the client that we saw on screen. Center of room control and experience. The touch display, again, is great for that very small huddle room, very personal feel to experience with being in a meeting. Switching gears from the TC8 touch controller that we had on the desktop just a moment ago, that's a great setup, especially in a room that's a little bigger where you're not readily next to your display. It's a room that maybe isn't quite so personal, so that you're not sitting right next to the screen itself, and the screen is not a touch screen. Therefore, having that center of table control and access for what the TC8 provides is super important. In a room that's more personal, maybe the huddle room size where you've got the touch screen there, because again, the Poly Studio X30 is compatible with touch screens as well as the TC8. It might be good to just pair the X30 with the touchscreen itself, which is what we've done here. So we're going to demonstrate managing the device this way. As you can see, we're touchscreen. We can go into our settings. We can go check out device settings, all this same stuff that we already did. As you can see, it's a little bit quicker to navigate this way than it was using the control on the TC8. So really great that we have those controls with the TC8, kind of like a remote, except a remote that sits on the desktop and you just touch at the center of the conference table. But let's go ahead and jump into a meeting, one touch join, and experience the device meetings with Microsoft Teams using the Poly Studio X30 with a touchscreen. We are joining this meeting, and there we go. We're now in, and we're looking at the back of me from the meeting that is being run at the other side of the room there. So we're going to go ahead and record this so that we get a feel for what the audio sounds like coming into the Poly Studio X30, as well as what the recorded video looks like in a Microsoft Teams meeting. And we're looking at the back of me from the meeting that is being run at the other side of the room there. So we're going to go ahead and record this so that we get a feel for what the audio sounds like coming out or coming into the Poly Studio X30, as well as what the recorded video looks like in a Microsoft Teams meeting when the Poly Studio X30 is the device being your video input. So a Microsoft Teams recording is not a very good demonstration of the audio or video quality in a Microsoft Teams meeting, let alone the device's capabilities by itself. So I wanted to do a very quick recording using XSplit Broadcaster in 4K using the X30 as both the video and audio input so that you get a good feeling for what it's like to speak and be heard through the X30, as well as the resolution and streaming capabilities in 4K with the X30. Now that we have retrieved the IP address for our X30 from the TC8 settings screen, we have put that IP address into our browser URL field up here, navigated to the page, accepted the fact that there was no certificate set, and signed in. We are at the dashboard for this interface, and as you can see, there's quite a bit of information here. We've got system details, network settings, usage factors, all kinds of helpful information. We get a status screen here that shows all the different components that are being utilized and set up at this stage with the system. You can see that we're running in Microsoft Teams mode here as well. There are a few different modes, and there are a lot of settings throughout this device, which is great. The more settings, the more customized experience you can have, and that is awesome. It can take quite some time, especially for these videos, to try to step through each of them when each of you can really go through and explore them yourself later on or read up on that online. But I am going to quickly step through each field and pretty much gloss over a bunch of settings, but there's a couple that I'm going to call out in the process. First up, we go to Application Management. You can see we're in Teams again. So we pop down into General Settings. Now, my information, this has a bunch of info that you can provide if you want to. We're not going to bother with that at this time. Choosing a provider. Right now, we are in Teams mode. If we wanted to, we could change this to Zoom Rooms, Poly. Poly has its own mode there so that you can use this device as pretty much a really awesome high-powered personal camera for your laptop with speakers and microphones and the whole 9 yards. Or we have the ability to use this as a go-to room and 8x8 meeting rooms. We're going to pop this into Zoom Rooms in a little bit here, which will prompt us to do a system reset and see how that pans out for us. You can set your system language and the date and time. Device management, here's where we can check for updates. Now, you'll see right here that we are on a version that is older than the version it has found. We pulled that information from the Polycom support site. You could also choose to put your own URL in here if you had one, or we can use Microsoft Teams Device Management and update this device through the Teams Admin Center. Right now, we're going to leave it as is. We could also flip on automatic updates if we didn't want to have to manually update it. We can trigger a check for updates and tell it to update all. Looking down here at the connected devices, we have our TC8, which, as I mentioned earlier, when you buy the TC8 with an X30 or X50, it automatically pairs the devices so you don't have to do any pairing. To unpair them, you have to come in here and click unpair, which I will not do at this time. Also, if we wanted to set a certificate for the device for connecting to it securely with SSL, we can do that as well. Jumping over to our system settings, we can change the name of our room. We can change the name of the device itself. Make note that changing the device name is how the administrator identifies the device. Changing the room name is how you're going to connect to it with AirPlay, Miracast, or the Poly Content app. You can set your sleep settings. You can do out of office hours, which makes sleep settings kick in even faster for power saving features. And then we've got remote control and keyboard settings as well. Remote control, again, we are not paired with a remote control, but you can start discovery mode there too if you wanted to. On the network side, right now, we are doing DHCP and grabbing our IP address automatically over Ethernet. There are various LAN options in here. You can see there's a lot. I'm not going to go through all those. Network quality, a lot of different settings you can set to affect quality. You've got quality preference for people or content or both. Types of service, IP precedence or diff serve. A lot of things in here, and I'm not going to go into those details right now. Firewall settings, and then finally, we can choose a web proxy if we want to as well. On the Wi-Fi network, if we wanted to choose a secondary network here, we could choose Wi-Fi, and then there's a number of Wi-Fi settings. We're going to skip over that for the moment. And then DNS. If we were not doing DHCP, we could set our DNS servers in here as well. Jumping down to audio and video. First up, we've got monitors, and there is some consumer electronics control features that we can enable if the HDMI monitor supports that protocol. On the audio side, there are a lot of audio settings in here. We can control the volume for our sound effects. We can choose different tones for our ringtones versus user alert tones. A lot of different behaviors. Enable join and leave tones, keyboard noise reduction and noise block. We've got our acoustic fence settings down here. There's just a lot, and I can scroll on down and you can see that we can mess around with our stereo mode, HDMI, audio output. Most of this stuff I think would get me into trouble, so I'm not gonna bother diving into it or trying to play around with the settings. But as you can see, large volume of choice. Switching gears over to our video inputs, we can enable the camera update if we wanted to, allow other participants in a call to control the camera, enable camera preset snapshots icons, camera sleep mode. We've chosen it to save energy, but we could do a fast wake up as well. And then input 1. So we're going to display as people, and we have HDMI format. HDMI is our input format. The sharpness level for optimized for could be motion as well. orientation is normal, but we could change that to inverted. So many different settings: sharpness, brightness, white balance, color saturation, all of your normal tweaks that you can do to optimize video in a conferencing system. There are certainly a lot of those options offered here. The main thing I want to call attention to here is our tracking mode, right? We saw that in motion a little bit during this video, and you can either frame the group, which is more worried about making sure that everybody in the room is in the picture in some kind of way, or frame the speaker, in which case we're kind of ignoring the overall group and making sure we make an optimal picture or optimal zooming in of the speaker rather than everybody in the room. Or we can turn off tracking mode so that the camera's not doing any of that. There is a lot you can do with security here. On the access side, we can turn on our web access, which is turned on, network intrusion detection system, telnet access. I mean, look through this. This is a ton of stuff you can do. If you want to read through this in more detail, pause the video here and take a glance through all the different settings that you have access to. Certificates. We can set certificates on both the device itself as well as the TC8. So our X30 up top, and then our Poly TC8. We create and download that CSR, generate our certificate, and then we install it. Same thing over here with the X30 itself. Create that CSR, install the certificate. Good stuff. Local accounts. So we choose our account lockout settings and set your admin username and password. Password requirements. So we're not just setting passwords and making sure we're being secure. There are a lot of different password requirements that we can implement to restrict access to the device. Set a security code and the security banner. We're going to come back to this in just a second because I think this is really cool. And then servers. We can set our provisioning server if we need to, SNMP, and cloud. Good stuff. And then diagnostics. We got our system status page, which we saw on our dashboard. Logs, lots to do with logs in here. It's always important to be able to debug things and provide the support team with your logs. You can do a system reset where we simply restart the device or reset the entire configuration. And then sessions, who is currently connected to this device? And only I am at this time. Now that we've gone through all those, let's go back to security and click on the security banner. You can set a security banner that shows up for when someone's about to log into this portal, which I think is really neat. You can either do a custom banner text or DoD. So I'm going to say save here, and then we're going to sign out. Here's our little sign out button up top. And check that out. Now we've got this whole DoD custom thing off to the side telling us, hey, this is an U.S. government information system, blah, blah, blah. And then we go ahead and put the regular admin password and get into it and all that good stuff. Tells us the last successful logon, number of failed attempts. Gives you a little heads up about activity that may or may not have been happening with accessing the system. I'm just going to flip that back off really quick, but I think it's super cool. So we mentioned earlier that we can also manage our collaboration bars from Microsoft Teams within the Microsoft Teams Admin Center. To do that, you go to the Admin Center, go to Devices, and we have phones, we have Teams Rooms, so cool to see that in there now, and collaboration bars. We go to collaboration bars, and now that we've already signed in with our account, we'll see the Poly Studio right there. We can see obviously the device name is Poly Studio. It's online. We see we had a Yealink VC210 plugged in earlier. It's not online right now. We get our manufacturer, model, action that's currently being undertaken, which there are none at the moment. The IP address if we need to access it, and then the history of items that have been done to it. Nothing has been done to the device here. So this is where we can do a little bit of management. If we check that, we can assign a configuration. If we had configured a configuration profile, we can update the device, we can restart the device, and we can remove the device. We say edit, we can put an asset tag, as well as add notes in here as well, and change our device name to be something a little more better than this, right? So maybe something a little more clean like this down here. I'm not going to do that at this time. If we click on update, you'll notice that we have our regular update settings in here. The auto update frequency is as soon as available, defer by 30 days, 90 days. And then if you had manual updates that you were allowed to do from here, you could do them here. But if you will recall, we are managing our updates over at the general settings and device management. And here's where we're doing that. If we tell this Microsoft Teams device management, the changes were submitted successfully. So now we no longer have an update mode over here. We're no longer updating our device from this interface. We now expect to do that over in the Microsoft Teams Admin Center. And there we go. The Poly Studio X30 collaboration bar, the TC8 controller, and the experiences of managing Microsoft Teams meetings, both from the TC8 controller and a touch display if you've got that. As always, I hope you found this helpful, and if you did, please retweet, share, splash it all over social media. If you have not already done so, I would strongly encourage you to subscribe below in the bottom right-hand corner. Super important to see all the other riveting content that I put out. Thanks for watching, and I hope we'll see you back here for the next product overview and demo.